Part 65. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 649. Subai spent a lot of effort to avoid the detection near the hotel and returned to the room. Cinderella was sleeping on the table. She had stripped naked and was wearing fishnet stockings that she had just cut. It looked like, she has that kind of wild charm, and coupled with her innate pity temperament, it really highlights the feeling of fishnet stockings. The injuries on his body slowly recovered on the way back, but Subai is still a little weak now. Although the Blood Prince is not a high-level listener, he is also very strong. If he goes all out to fight in a serious manner, Subai felt that he could defeat him with 70% certainty, provided that the other party did not know any blood magic, but the possibility that the other party did not know blood magic was relatively small. After all, he was an orthodox blood royal family, and he was only a halfway monk who took the blood of the blood to extreme interests. It is a typical example of transformation. Subai himself is not very clear about what kind of changes will occur after the vampire magic reaches this level. Therefore, to be on the safe side, the two sides were at least evenly matched. Subai had a certain advantage, but was not sure of killing the other party. This is actually the embarrassing part of the senior audience's strength below the advanced audience. If you don't become a senior audience for a day, but still stay within the scope of the senior audience's strength, if you face a low-level senior person who is not as good as you can crush him and kill him. But if you face an opponent who is above the mid-level among senior players, then you have to pay a certain price when you want to kill him. And if the opponent is two people, then your chances of winning are likely to be reduced a lot. Just like at the Kayakan Pier, when Subai faced the combination of the female magician and the bald man, even if he killed the female magician in the end, Subai himself paid a huge price. If it was one-on-one, if so, Subai would undoubtedly feel much more relaxed and calm. But the problem is that even if you are the best among the seniors, your upper limit is here, so you cannot crush a group of seniors like the senior audience. Becoming an advanced listener is already an urgent matter for Subai, but Subai has not reached the threshold of an advanced listener yet. This means that he seems to be at the top of a senior audience, but in fact there are still more things above. There is still a long way to go, but I don't know what's going on with Xiezhen. Liang Sen was forced to preach. Xiezhen, the veteran who is recognized as the closest to the senior audience, how is he now? Perhaps, when I leave this story world and return to Shanghai, I can go to Xiezhen and ask about the senior audience. Now I can only hope that if Xiezhen is successfully promoted to the senior audience, he will never forget each other even if we are rich and noble. Lying on the bed, Subai closed his eyes. At this time, there was nothing else to do except sleep. Because of his injury last night, Subai slept deeply and for a long time. It was not until noon the next day that Subai woke up leisurely. "You're awake. Cinderella is mopping the floor, and the ground is stained with blood." Subai shook his head in confusion. His blood actually dripped down without him noticing. It must be because of the vampire prince that he had a certain impact on the bloodline he had always hidden. Okay. This kind of impact is not very serious. These blood stains are most likely the blood scabs that fell off his body yesterday. They belong to the part of blood contaminated by the vampire prince and cannot be reabsorbed back into his body. Cinderella knelt on the ground and wiped the floor. Her thighs and fishnet stockings were naturally stained with Subai's blood, and even the fishnet stockings were slightly discolored. Subai didn't notice this. After washing casually, Subai let Cinderella spend money to buy 2 pieces of food from the hotel owner. Now the two people seem to be dependent on each other, but in fact it is a more pure relationship of mutual use than the relationship between the audience. "Sir, my fishnet stockings are dirty, do they need to be washed?" Cinderella asked while eating and looking at Subai. Only then did Subai notice that Cinderella's fishnet stockings had changed from green to dark red. "No, it's good. This way you can't tell it's made of fishing net. Subai didn't take it seriously. Well, okay, Cinderella naturally followed Subai's orders. Don't forget to practice these days. There are still 4 days until the banquet. You should practice more. Subai pointed to the chair leg that was still inserted upside down on the floor and said. I will, I understand. Cinderella nodded. It's a pity that there isn't enough time, otherwise Subai would really dream of asking Cinderella to grind an iron pestle into a needle. In this way, Cinderella's foot skills should be perfected. 4 days, whether slowly or quickly, for Subai, these 4 days passed very peacefully, but in this calmness, there was actually a tendency that the storm was about to come. There have been several violent clashes in the city in the past few days. It was obvious that the audience had a conflict in the city. Subai did not go to check. What he has to do now is to stay by Cinderella's side and then bring Cinderella to safety. It will be sent to the banquet. Whether it can succeed or not depends on Cinderella's own luck. Subai didn't know if the other Cinderellas were all modeled after his own Cinderella. If every Cinderella had his own characteristics, then his own, well, he didn't know if it would be an advantage. But at least he should be a leader in bed skills. Sometimes I think it's quite ridiculous when I think about it. The audience, now has to rely on this kind of ingenious trick to achieve the success of the mission. Of course, there is a collision of everyone's strength and conspiracy and assassination, but according to Subai's current observation, look, most people still regard Cinderella in their hands as a trump card and intend to play it. This gives people a feeling that they are not doing their job properly. Why has the style of the audience's story world become so strange? But after thinking about it, it is not impossible that the broadcaster was a little tired of the taste of fighting and killing, so he changed the seasoning to cook this dish. In fact, just like the Cinderella that Subai killed the 3 Western listeners before, although they will lose the rewards for obtaining the main mission too, and they will also face the penalty of increasing the difficulty of the main mission 3 by 50%, during this period, the 3 of them can freely explore the story world, because as the game progresses, with Cinderella's death, they have automatically missed the main mission too. In this case, if the 3 of them explore the world of the story instead of entering the city, searching for monsters in the forest, and trying their luck in the autumn wind elsewhere, the broadcast will not interfere. This is actually a kind of lost experience. Harvest the mulberry trees. But now Subai has nothing to do. So much preparation has been done before, and he is a vampire. Bringing Cinderella into the banquet will undoubtedly gain a great advantage. Under this situation, Subai has no reason to start. Just kill your own Cinderella with a knife and try your luck in the story world. Sir, I'm ready. Cinderella put on a new dress, a pair of more delicate leather boots on her feet, and the fishnet stockings on her thighs showed a coveted look. I'm still a little panicked, Cinderella said to Subai, then she looked at Subai's crotch. I've been practicing with the legs of a chair recently, and I haven't touched the real thing. I'm afraid that Subai stood up and reached out to pat Cinderella on the shoulder. It's okay. A little roughness and incoherence can make the prince think you are relatively pure. You understand this? I understand, Cinderella nodded. Okay, we can set off now. Asking the hotel owner to reserve a carriage, Subai and Cinderella got on the carriage together. The count's mansion was actually not in the city, but on the outskirts of the city. It occupied a large area and was a castle, including a large farm on all sides with the castle as the center. The banquet started in the evening, and there were already a lot of people coming. When they approached the door, the carriage stopped and they could not go any further. Subai and Cinderella got out of the car. As soon as Cinderella's outfit appeared, it attracted the attention of many people nearby. It was really hard not to notice the pair of fishnet stockings. No invitation is required to enter this banquet, anyone who is destined can come. Subai and Cinderella walked forward for a while and saw an acquaintance, an Le. Anil was standing with Nova at this time. Next to the two of them, there was also a girl who looked very innocent in a white dress. Obviously, that was their Cinderella, but they and Subai walked away. The route is different. Subai's route is avant-garde and hot, while their main focus is pure style. Subai paid special attention to Cinderella's feet. They were a pair of white high heels, not the red glass slippers. At this time, Subai saw Gu Yuzhong and Lancer walking over. They were also accompanied by a girl, who was very gorgeously dressed and wore a pair of red crystal slippers, which were very dazzling. When Gu Yuzhong saw Subai and an Le, he just snorted softly and walked past them with a victor's attitude. Gu Yuzhong enjoyed the angry and unwilling expression on Anil's face. After Gu Yuzhong and Lancer brought their Cinderella to the front, Anil regained his composure, looked at Subai with a meaningful smile and said, "You know, there's nothing funnier than watching a self-righteous villain die. So, you deliberately let them steal the red glass slippers you stole?" Subai asked. "Otherwise, those red glass slippers are the humming prince's." Hey, let's wait and see the show." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 650. The standard of the banquet was very high. The entire garden was filled with tables, chairs, and shelves. Good-looking maids and handsome waiters walked through it to serve the guests. Most of them were vampires, but low-level vampires. All in all, it was a very lively and luxurious place, so luxurious that it was of a higher standard than the banquets Subai had experienced in the real world before. After all, although the organizer was the earl in the city, the actual organizer behind the scenes was a vampire. The vampires are also famous for their luxury and enjoyment. After all, they have a long lifespan, so they naturally know how to enjoy life, and enjoy life. Subai picked up a glass of red wine and took a sip. The taste of the red wine was very mellow, with a bit of natural flavor. Even in the real world, it is difficult to drink red wine of this level. After all, no matter how the future generations pursue simplicity, the brewing method cannot return to this level of authenticity. Cinderella stood next to Subai. She was also drinking, but her nervousness could be seen. "Don't be nervous, it's okay," Subai comforted him. Looking around, Subai found that there were many people around, but this didn't seem to be the real core area of the banquet. The real core area seemed to be inside the castle, and here it is just a place to entertain ordinary foreign guests. To put it in layman's terms, the outside is where lunch boxes are distributed to the walk-ons, and the inside is where celebrities and celebrities rest. I think the vampire prince should also be inside. Subai held Cinderella's hand and walked forward. If he kept wandering outside, how could he get into the prince's eyes? It's equivalent to a certain beautiful woman in ancient times. No matter how beautiful she is, how can the emperor visit you if you can't enter the palace? But not every beautiful woman is named Xia Yuhi. There were many people gathered here who wanted to get in. Subai also saw two people who looked like Western listeners. They also had a female companion beside them. Judging from their temperament, they could both be Cinderellas. Of course, the most important thing was the most important thing is to look at the female companion's feet. The shoes and legs are carefully designed and taken care of. It seems that there are no fools in the audience, and everyone can guess the prince's special hobby. Anil and Nova walked to Subai. He took out an invitation from his arms, smiled and said, "External banquets do not require invitations, but internal banquets do." "Why, you've been training your guys' humming skills for many days and you're so happy that you didn't even ask about this." Anil is a very smart person. Subai has discovered this a long time ago. As a spiritual strengthener, it is impossible for his brain to be bad. However, this person sometimes behaves like Thailand's sharp-edged monk, Fatty Gyatso, and others. They are also smart people, but they know how to restrain themselves. "Oh, I really forgot," Subai shrugged helplessly. Haha, and Ellie laughed twice. Wu Neihe is now missing. Either he was intercepted or his Cinderella was killed. Naturally, there is no need for him to come to this banquet again to take care of this main task too. What happened was that Lancer and Gu Yizhong were tricked by him. He deliberately let them snatch the red glass slippers from his hands. As soon as they entered, they would probably be captured and killed by the vampires inside. Subai failed to get the invitation and couldn't get in, so his competitors were the two Westerners and their Cinderella. If you choose one of the three, your chances of winning are actually very high. What Gu Yizhong took out was not an invitation, but a token. This token should be the token of the city lord. Obviously during this period, Gu Yizhong and Lancer focused on building relationships with the city lord in order to obtain the opportunity to participate in this event. Eligibility for internal banquets. A group of waiters standing at the door are responsible for checking the names and identities of people entering the core area. They are all vampires. Although they are wearing waiters' clothes, anyone with a discerning eye can tell at a glance that they are not just waiters. In this manner, according to Sudbai's own analysis, there should be a lot of vampires with senior or above strength, so if you want to force your way in or act recklessly, the outcome you are waiting for is to seek death. Because it is impossible for the radio to have a situation where a certain listener goes to the banquet and captures the prince alive. Otherwise, the prince is captured alive and forced to marry his Cinderella into the bridal chamber. The existence of this main task too, what's the point? This is not in line with the aesthetics of broadcasting, so although it is impossible to tell the strength of the people around him from the breath, Subai knows that the broadcast should set up a strength configuration for the vampires here that is enough to shock all listeners. Gu Yizhong and Lancer led their Cinderella in. Anil showed her invitation with a smile and was let in. Over there, the two Westerners each took out their identity items and delivered them over, and both gained access rights. Below, it seemed that Subai was the only one left. Gu Yizhong, Lancer, Anil, and Nova were not in a hurry to go inside. Instead, they stood on the steps as if they wanted to see Subai's joke. Anil was a little nervous. He was a little worried that Subai would not be able to get in. Tell Gu Yizhong about the red glass slippers directly. Not only will his plan to seduce Gu Yizhong be completely frustrated, but it will even attract the hatred of Gu Yizhong and Lancer in this story world. After all, his actions could be regarded as deliberately carrying them into the pile of dead people. The other two Western audience members naturally discovered Subai's identity for no other reason than the woman wearing fishnet stockings standing next to Subai. It was clear that only the audience could design such fashionable clothing. In order to satisfy the prince's foot fetish, they even felt a little regretful. Why didn't they think of this idea earlier? But Subai still took the initiative to move forward. Gu Yizhong's eyes narrowed. He felt that Subai was overestimating his capabilities. The security of the banquet venue here was terrible. Even if you are an audience member, you must abide by the rules here. If you dare to mess around, you will be dead. Anil was also a little puzzled. When Subai replied that he didn't have an invitation or identification, it didn't sound like he was lying. There was no need for him to lie at that time. Please stay. The two waiters stretched out their hands to stop Subai. Cinderella next to Subai held Subai's hand tightly, because she knew that Subai had no time to obtain any identity objects, because he had been staying with her these past few days. Although he actually did not, there was no request to enjoy his services, but he definitely didn't leave. A smile appeared on Subai's lips, but then his skin began to turn white, his two fangs exposed, and he growled at the two waiters in front of him. This is the anger from the high-level vampires who are disrespectful to you. The two waiters were immediately horrified and immediately knelt down. The other waiters in charge of security also knelt down immediately. Anything can be faked, even identity cards and invitations can be faked, but the pressure from bloodline makes it impossible to fake. Subai had revealed the aura of a high-level vampire just now, so they naturally knew that they were facing a high-level vampire. Subai smiled slightly, put away his fangs, and his skin color returned to normal. He took Cinderella's hand and began to walk up slowly. At the same time, his eyes were still leisurely scanning the faces of Gu Yuzhong, Anil, and others. Past. Ah. I didn't expect it. I am of blood descent. Coming here feels like coming home. Do you need an invitation? The prince was sitting in his seat. The number of guests at the banquet here was much less than outside, but there were about 100 people. They all drank and laughed together, making it very lively. The noble lady, the princess, sat next to the prince, put her hand on the prince's shoulder, and asked about the prince's injury with some concern. I was attacked by someone on the road before, and that person went out with the prince again. It is said that there was a fight between the two parties, and the prince failed to keep the assassin. The prince finally persuaded the old princess to leave him, and he finally had some peace and quiet. He picked up the wine glass and took a sip of the wine, but found it a bit difficult to drink. In fact, what lingered in the prince's mind these past few days was actually the feeling of eating the other person's blood that day. That taste, with a strange familiarity and specialness, seemed to be the most mellow wine in the world, which made him unable to extricate himself. The prince knew that he had become obsessed with that taste. It's no wonder that the vampires love blood the most, and Subai's blood contains elements of the vampires themselves, and is blended with many other bloodlines. Like assorted candy, it is indeed a treat that is hard to refuse for the vampires. The temptation, and this prince's taste has always been very unique. Moreover, the prince didn't pay much attention to this banquet at all. He didn't believe his mother if she believed in the prophet. Moreover, he was indeed not interested in women and was only interested in men. Let him come here to select the princess. It really feels awkward for a deaf person to attend a concert. But there was no other way. In order to maintain the image of the blood royal family, he had to complete this process even if he was unwilling. The prince's nose suddenly moved. Vaguely, he seemed to smell that familiar smell. The prince immediately stood up, his eyes wandering around, and then he judged that the smell came from the door. Are you here too? There was a fleeting glint in the prince's eyes, and he immediately walked down from his seat and walked towards the door. At this time, many audience members with their own thoughts were just walking in from the door with their own Cinderellas. And the prince appeared in front of them so impatiently. All the audience, including Subai, suddenly felt upset in their hearts. Damn! Don't leave without a little bit of foreshadowing. Are you just going straight for Cinderella? As for the prince, his eyes were now fixed on one pair of legs. On that pair of legs, he smelled a smell of obsession that made him forget to eat and sleep. Ah! I really can't wait to lick those legs. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 651. No matter how much preparation and planning there is, it may not be as good as the east wind coming to Chibi. Everything comes so unexpectedly that people feel it is even too unreal. The prince's eyes were fixed on Cinderella's legs next to Subai. Infatuated. Crazy. Can't wait. Everything was clearly shown on the prince's face. At this time, the prince was really no different from the idiots on the tram in the island country, except for the drool dripping from the corner of his mouth. Anil's eyes widened, Gu Yuzhong's breathing tightened, Lancer and Nova also had disbelief on their faces, and the other two Western audience members also looked like they had seen a ghost. Could it be that this person really made the right bet? Is the prince's resistance to fishnet stockings so low? Do fishnet stockings really have such a terrifying charm? You must know that the Cinderella you and others have been carefully trained by everyone these days, and you and others also worked hard to find connections and favors before you were qualified to enter the banquet's internal venue. Why don't you, the prince, be so partial? Do you want to be so direct? Why don't you do it so simply? You should at least hesitate. You should at least hesitate a little longer. You can at least give us some gaming experience. We have worked hard and prepared for so long, and you made the decision just like this in person. How can you do this? Not only the rest of the audience, but even Subai himself was a little confused. The prince's reaction was indeed too fast and too decisive. Could it be that my fishnet stockings really worked wonders? But then, Subai's eyes fell on Cinderella's fishnet stockings. The fishnet stockings had obviously changed color. For a moment, Subai was suddenly shocked. Cinderella's fishnet stockings were contaminated when she wiped the floor. His own blood stained this color, which he had always ignored before, but now it was obvious that it was probably the blood left on Cinderella's fishnet stockings that attracted the prince's attention. Damn it, why are you so careless? No more. He can't stay here any longer. Cinderella was brought here by himself, so if he continues to stay here, his identity will be discovered sooner or later. Why does this prince's nose look like a dog? You, come with me. As soon as the prince finished speaking, he picked up Cinderella and walked straight to the back. Cinderella was appropriately shy and buried her face in the prince's arms. She knew that her future happy life had begun. During the banquet, the rest of the people began to applaud and congratulate the prince for finding his lover. Although the prince was a little impatient and a little abrupt. However, the vampire clan is a group with a cold and extreme personality. This fact is nothing. Even the vampire clan present felt that this was the style that their prince should have, and it was also the most authentic expression of the vampire clan's nature. There were rumors before that the prince was a manly man, but now they can be proven to be false. The old princess's eyes first flashed on her son. When her son carried the girl and walked to the back, her eyes naturally fell on the girl wearing red glass slippers. Her son thought, play whatever you want, do whatever you want, as long as he still likes women and has feelings for women, then as a mother, you can ignore the others and rest assured. The pair of red crystal slippers actually became the focus of the audience from the very beginning. Naturally, they could not escape the eyes of the old princess. Moreover, the old princess knew very well that the red pair of crystal slippers was the pair she had lost. The old princess tapped her fingers lightly on the knife and fork in front of her, and an old waiter appeared next to the old princess. Princess, please give your orders. The one wearing the red glass slipper and the person next to her, stay with me. Yes. The old waiter glanced over there. After confirming the target, he nodded and disappeared into the darkness behind him. Main Mission 2 completed by Subai. Task Reward 1, Task Reward 2, Task Reward 3, and Task Reward 4 will be issued after the story world ends. Main Mission 3 is now released, kill the old princess of the vampire clan. Mission time limit, 30 days. Mission reward, 1000 story points, 3 opportunities to return to the story world, and 3 opportunities to enter the trial space. P.S. Rewards are distributed according to task contribution. All the audience present were a little baffled. Although the prince seemed to be no different from Chi and Han before, everyone still couldn't accept that Main Mission 2 was completed by Subai. At this time, Subai didn't have any look of pride on his face. On the contrary, Subai knew that Cinderella would definitely betray him directly when the prince pressed him. If he continued to stay here, he would be tantamount to staying here. In the wolf den, the prince was obviously interested in his own blood. Prediction and analysis of danger are skills that every audience can master, and now, Subai could sense that the air around him seemed to be friendly to him from time to time. He began to back away, preparing to leave here first. The main task 3 is to kill the vampire princess. The noble lady is sitting in the center of the banquet, right in front of everyone, but Subai has no intention of taking action at this time. After all, this is the base camp of the vampire clan. There must be someone hiding around the old princess. A strong vampire, so killing the princess at this time is a very stupid choice. You must know that the princess had gone for a walk before, and the glass slippers were stolen by Anil after being hypnotized. This is enough to show that if you want to assassinate the princess, there are other more convenient opportunities to do it. There is no need to do it in full view of the vampire lair. Unlike Subai, who retreated bravely, Anil, Lancer, Guyazhang, Nova and the other two Western audience members all subconsciously focused on the old princess. Main mission 2, they had been busy for so many days, and they didn't even get a sip of soup, leaving Subai to eat alone. This was the time when they were the most unhappy and excited, and this kind of unhappiness and excitement, it can easily affect a person's normal judgment. At this time, they hesitated whether to kill the old princess in one go, or it would be more appropriate to call it impulsive. Anyway, the rewards and times of main task 3 are distributed according to contribution. If everyone works together, how many rewards can be distributed depends on their own ability, which is also fair. At this time, Subai's retreat and departure could no longer attract their attention. Buzz. A trembling sound suddenly came out. 3 old men in ancient costumes appeared in front of Cinderella, who was wearing red glass slippers, and together they surrounded Guyazhang and Lancer heel around Cinderella. Anil's eyes widened. He was a spiritual powerhouse and could obtain information much faster than others. At that moment, he immediately took Nova's hand and shouted, "Come on, these 3 are all vampires at the pinnacle of seniority." Perhaps Anil had some hesitation before, but when 3 senior vampire elders with peak aura appeared on the other side, Anil knew that it was a fool's errand to kill the old princess here. Moreover, Anil once stole the glass slipper from the old princess. He knew best that as long as the timing was right, in this month, he could seize the opportunity when the old princess came out alone to assassinate, and the success rate could be said to be very high. There is absolutely no need to force the entire vampire clan here. Subai was the first to leave, Anil and Nova were the second group, and then the 2 Western audience members also saw that the situation was not good and left together. Of course, there were also many guests from the internal banquet. Knowing that something might be going on, left quickly. Guyazhang still wanted to explain what he was asking, or reveal his relationship with the city lord, but when he saw the 3 vampire old men directly taking out the purple chains, Guyazhang knew that there was no point in explaining in words. At that moment, a metal ball had been suspended in his clothes, and then burst out instantly. Bang! 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 The bodies of the 3 vampire old men were punched with a series of holes, but their injuries quickly recovered. The iron chains were swept out, and the 3 people surrounded Guyazhang, Lancer, and Cinderella. Not long after Subai left the castle, he heard an explosion from inside the castle. It was obvious that someone had taken action inside. An LE actually looked back with gloating eyes while running. The accident between Guyazhang and Lancer was entirely designed by an LE. He now feels quite accomplished. Hiss, 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 hiss. Cinderella was lying on the bed. She thought she was going to serve the prince, but she didn't expect that the prince would directly start his mouth. His tongue kept roaming around her thighs, making Cinderella feel itchy and uncomfortable. Cinderella is not a virgin. She knows that most of those men only care about themselves and their own comfort when doing this kind of thing, and don't care about women's feelings. But now the prince's performance makes her feel it's touching. Yes. Move. The prince is a person who knows how to love others. Very nice. However, after the prince licked all the blood stains on Cinderella's fishnet stockings, he opened his mouth and bit the flesh of Cinderella's thigh, tore off a piece of meat and chewed it in his mouth. Ah! Cinderella let out a scream of pain. But after spitting out the flesh and blood in his mouth, the prince looked at Cinderella in confusion. "You are not my favorite taste, tell me now. Who's that person? Where is that person?" The prince grabbed Cinderella's neck with one hand and lifted Cinderella up. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 652. After leaving the Earl's mansion, Subai did not stay in the city any longer, because it was obvious that the city was full of vampire spies. If the prince was really as paranoid about his own blood as he thought, persistence, then Subai is undoubtedly the most dangerous among all the surviving listeners now, because the prince will definitely send people to find him with all his strength. Now, the only thing to be thankful for is that he completed the main task too. Although it was indeed a matter of luck, Subai also paid a heavy price for it. For example, the rest of the audience like Anil could continue to leisurely look for other opportunities to assassinate the old princess, but Subai himself could only leave the city first and prepare for the pursuit from the vampire clan. Broadcast 1 said in Main Mission 2 that for those who failed to complete Main Mission 2, the difficulty of Main Mission 3 would be increased by 50%. Previously, Subai thought this should be a benefit for those who completed Main Mission 2. But now I see it as a party involved. This is clearly a way to balance myself, the one who completes the task, and make other people's tasks more difficult. After leaving the city, Subai walked alone into the dense forest next door, found a small waterfall and took a shower, then sat shirtless on a rock nearby. It's almost morning after a busy night. Various things changed, making Subai look very busy all night. Lying on the stone, eyes slightly open, the morning light has appeared in the distance, the sunrise. Subai narrowed his eyes. At this time, he was indeed a little tired and needed a rest. But just when Subai was about to slowly awaken his sense of sleep, a faint sound suddenly came from the forest. The sound. Subai's eyes were completely closed at this time, but his perception of the surroundings was stronger, and all the muscles in his body were quietly tense at this time. If the vampire finds him now, his life in this story world will not be so easy. Whoosh! 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 Shadows began to fly around, gradually forming a circle around Subai who was lying on the rock. Hiss! There was a crisp sound, and a shadow approached Subai directly. At the same time, a sharp dagger slashed towards Subai's neck in an extremely smooth way. Buzz! Subai jumped into the air and dodged the opponent's dagger. At the same time, Subai's muscle strength exploded and he got close to him in an instant, punching directly through the opponent's body. Boom! The vampire, whose entire chest was completely smashed, staggered back a few steps with a look of disbelief on his face, and finally fell into the waterfall behind. So weak. At this time, several other figures began to gradually move away from Subai. Apparently, after seeing their companions being killed by Subai with one blow, they did not have the courage to continue charging forward. But this also shows from the side that this is just a small team searching for itself, not a real hunting team. Subai quickly put on his clothes and started to move. Although he didn't know how the vampires found him, but now that his whereabouts were exposed, in order to delay a little more time and gain some space for himself, he couldn't stop and just keep moving. But the methods and abilities of the orthodox vampires were beyond what Subai could understand, because after half an hour of moving completely irregularly, Subai found a cloaked man in front of him. The old man's face was very old and pale, and he looked very similar to the old man who surrounded Gu Yuzhong and the others in the banquet hall last night. The old man seemed to be waiting for work here, waiting for Subai's arrival. Subai subconsciously pursed his lips and asked curiously, "I'm curious, how did you find me?" "You are also a vampire, you actually need to ask me this," the old man seemed a little surprised. He took off his gloves. "I originally thought you found me on purpose, because it is difficult for me to understand a person with a bloodline level. A vampire who is already very high will make such a mistake. Subai was also a little speechless. As a vampire, he was very particular about body recovery and actual combat abilities. As for vampire magic, if it weren't for his mutated bloodline, he would probably have exchanged it directly from the WeChat store to learn it, but now he would have learned it from the WeChat store. The vampire magic skills redeemed in the store can no longer be directly applied to his mutant bloodline, and Subai is even less likely to spend a lot of time studying vampire magic from scratch. Therefore, in a strict sense, Subai cannot be regarded as a complete vampire. "I have a good idea," Subai said as he looked at the old man walking over step by step. Say, the old man still didn't stop approaching. "I'll tie you up and slowly interrogate you, won't you know?" "Okay, try it." The old man's figure disappeared from the spot, really scattering like a gust of wind, but Subai knew that the opponent must be beside him. The sensitivity of the vampires has always been a great weapon for the vampires in battle. He relies on his own speed and reaction. The ability to manipulate the opponent with applause is a very labor-saving way of fighting. "If you fight the fast one, I'll fight the slow one." Subai stood there, except for his eyes that kept moving, but his body remained still. Hiss. The old man's figure appeared in front of Subai, and in the most direct and brave way, he held the spikes in both hands and stabbed Subai's face directly. 3 layers of ice immediately formed in front of Subai, but these 3 layers of ice were unable to stop the old man's ice spikes at all, and the ice layers collapsed instantly. But when the old man's spikes came to Subai's door, the spikes pierced directly into the phantom, and the old man's pupils shrank suddenly. Boom! A heavy punch hit the old man's back hard, sending the old man flying directly. Boom! The old man crashed into a tree. There was nothing wrong with the tree. The old man's body was rotten into meat paste, and then slowly regrouped. This was a more exaggerated way of relieving force. "You." The old man was very angry, because Subai's previous words and gestures really confused him, and he did not expect that Subai actually used a mirror image to confuse himself, and even used speed reversal to sneak attack him. Subai stretched out his hand and flicked the straw sandals on his clothes. The old man's strength was not bad. Strictly speaking, his strength was the same as his own. However, the strong men in the world of fairy tales were indeed incomparable to the audience. The audience was the killing machines cultivated by broadcasting have long been proficient in all kinds of combat experience, instincts, and calculations. However, these so-called strong men in the world of fairy tales, even the strong men in the dark camp, in Subai's view, are a bit naive. Cued. Blood curse. The old man made a hand seal, and a bright red mark appeared between his eyebrows, like a ball of flame. Subai suddenly recalled that when he first saw the memories of the 2 ancient vampires, the 2 vampires also had the same eyebrows when fighting. The mark appeared, and it was later authenticated with the monk. It should be a symbol of family bloodline, similar to a family crest. A strange red hexagonal star formation appeared at the old man's feet. At the same time, the surrounding flowers, plants, and trees all withered, and the light and evil nature of the formation became more and more intense. "Go to hell!" The old man let out a sharp roar and pushed his hands in Subai's direction. Subai felt as if he was frozen, and the vitality in his body was being sucked out crazily. "This. Is it blood magic? It seems that it is really a shame that I have never learned vampire magic. How does it feel to wait for death? How does it feel to have your life force sucked out?" The old man looked at Subai ferociously. "I don't have any special feeling. I just feel that your combat experience is really low. Do all of you people here fight in this way?" Subai spread his hand and pointed behind the old man. "There is someone behind you," Subai reminded. "You are on the verge of death, and you still want to lie to me." A look of pride appeared on the old man's face. He had already been deceived by Subai once before. This time, he would not be fooled by Subai again. Subai gently stroked his forehead and said speechlessly, "I told you that I would dig deep into my heart, but you don't believe me." Boom! A blast of energy hit the old man's head directly. The old man's head exploded and his body was crumbling. The magic he was controlling naturally failed in an instant, and Subai, who was stroking his forehead, instantly turned into a swift cheetah, pounced directly on the old man's side, opened its fangs and pierced under the old man's skin and began to frantically suck the old man's blood. The old man's head slowly grew back, and he saw another black-haired man standing behind him. However, before his head fully recovered, it gradually shriveled up again. In the end, under Subai's intake, the old man's head grew slowly. His body turned into a mummy, but his body still retained activity. Subai did not completely suck him dry because he still had to ask questions. Subai took out a delicate handkerchief from the old man's clothes. Subai wiped the corners of his mouth with a little reserve, stood up and looked at Wu Nehi standing in front of him. Wu Nehi asked curiously, "If I hadn't come to help you attack as promised when we met before, you might really have died. So, were you a little overconfident just now?" A person who let the Cinderella in his hand be killed early and wandered around outside the city for 10 days with no results, would give up the fight for the rewards of main mission 3? You don't even know what kind of vampires are in the city or what their situation is. Without me, how can you do the main mission 3 without me? I can find others to cooperate, Wu Nehi said. Oh, who are you looking for? Enli's sneak attack caused your Cinderella to be killed very early, and it was impossible for you to go find him again. Gu Yuzhong and the others are still under control, and you can't find them either. Are you going to find those Westerners to cooperate? Licking the heels of Westerners? Unless you have a problem with your IQ, I really won't worry about you not taking action, so I have the courage to experience the power of vampire magic. Oh, I was not disappointed. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 653. Is this place safe? Wu Nehi asked worriedly when he saw Subai carrying the old vampire's body into the cave. It shouldn't be safe, Subai told the truth. The vampire clan has a special way to find me. If nothing else happens, they should have a sample of my blood. Aren't you a vampire yourself? Wu Nehi squinted at Subai. I'm a bit special. I can't redeem blood magic directly from the WeChat store, so I'm not very clear about blood magic. Oh, that's a loss too. It's not bad. Subai looked around. Tell me, is this environment suitable for a counter-ambush? Counter-ambush, Wu Nehi said helplessly. Why do I feel like I was dragged into the wolf pit by you? If you had said earlier that you were the target of being hunted by the vampires, I would not have wanted to get together with you, even if I was alone. It's not completely impossible to sneak into the city to find an opportunity to assassinate the old princess. Now that we're on the pirate ship, let's work together to sail the ship. If nothing else happens, the prince may personally bring people to catch me, and I can tell you responsibly that Anil stole the old princesses. The red glass slipper has already attacked the old princess once on the street. The old princess is now a frightened bird. Do you think she might run out and wander around in the near future to give you a chance to assassinate her? Main mission 3 only lasts for 30 days. Within these 30 days, I think it is impossible for the princess to give us the audience another assassination opportunity similar to the last one. So, you mean, you want me to help you capture the prince, and then use the prince as a hostage? Almost, but it's more difficult to capture the prince. In fact, we can change our thinking. As long as the prince loses contact with the vampires in the city, then we will send a message to the city that the prince is with us. The old princess must personally come forward to redeem the person. In this case, our success rate in assassinating the old princess will undoubtedly increase a lot. At least, those vampires will only think that we are kidnappers for profit, and will not really realize that our purpose is actually to kill the old princess and do this thing that harms others and does not benefit ourselves. Therefore, at that time, it is very likely that the princess will take precautions not that high. But your idea is a bit too risky, and a bit too taken for granted. Let's not talk about whether we have the ability to make the vampire prince who is devoted to you lose contact. Besides, if the old princess doesn't do what you said, even if she comes to talk, the condition is also to bring a large group of people. What should I do? When it comes to doing things, how can it be possible to be perfect? Subai shrugged at Wu Neihe. Besides, broadcasting can't let you complete the task step by step. This is not in line with the aesthetics of broadcasting, isn't it? I still have to think about it. Now I really regret meeting you and getting together with you. Wu Neihe shook his head and said. Obviously, he now understood that Subai was an egg with a gap, and it would attract more vampires to chase him, and if he was with Subai, he would definitely be affected. Comrade Wu Neihe, it's a pity that you can't quit now even if you want to. A smile appeared on Subai's lips. We are actually surrounded now. As soon as Subai finished speaking, more than a dozen bloody shadows rushed towards here from all directions. The auras of these figures ranged from high to low, but the lowest ones were at the level of low-level seniors, and a few of the high ones were at the advanced level of seniors. A young man wearing blood-red clothes trimmed with gold landed on a big tree in front of him. He held a pair of fishnet stockings in his hand, sniffing them with a hint of salivation. Subai looked down at Subai and said softly, "Little cutie, you let people look for you all day and all night." After saying that, the prince's eyes fell on the old man's body next to Subai, and he frowned slightly. This was not his own. Could it be that his mother already knew about this, so she sent someone to kill him in advance? The prince took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart. For his mother, who likes to interfere in his own affairs, the prince's tolerance has slowly been exhausted. "Little cutie, I'm sorry. The guy next to you is not mine. He wants to kill you. How could I be willing to kill you?" The prince spoke very sincerely, but there was a sinister atmosphere in this sincerity. How can we counter an ambush when there are so many people on the other side? When things came to a close, Wu Neihe also knew that he had no choice but to escape even if he wanted to. But the current situation was indeed very tricky. If the other side only came with 3 or 4 people, then judging from the strength and quality of the two audiences, there is still great hope for a comeback, but there are more than a dozen people on the other side all of a sudden. How can they fight? How about you feel aggrieved? Wu Neihe leaned close to Subai and whispered, "I think that prince seems to be quite interested in you." Subai stretched out his hand and patted Wu Neihe's shoulder. "It's not like you're selling your ass." Of course, Subai knew what the prince's purpose was in finding her, but it was not out of love. The prince wanted to keep her in captivity like a breeding pig, feed him good food and drink every day, and then bleed him every now and then for his enjoyment. What are the listeners not willing to do in order to survive? Wu Neihe asked. Subai's mind moved, and he took a step back, putting a little distance away from Wu Neihe. A flash of light flashed across Wu Neihe's eyes, and he knew that this was because Subai had just noticed something unusual about his aura. Yes, just now, Wu Neihe wanted to directly rebel and control Subai to help the vampires. If he could stay in front of the prince and have a chance to get close to the core area of the vampires, he would assassinate him anyway. The world of the old princess story is over and you can return to the real world. Don't be stupid, Subai reminded Wu Neihe. I was the first one to ask the prince to kill you. You know, he didn't want me to die. Wu Neihe gritted his teeth. He knew that Subai was right. The other party did not want to kill Subai. If he wanted to kill Subai, everything would be easy. But the other party obviously had an ambiguous message. It was clear that he was not here to kill Subai. He was shouting dearly from left to right. If he helped them catch Subai, then if Subai became the favorite concubine, then he would bite him back. These vampires, it is very likely that he will kill himself to vent his anger on Subai. This situation is really difficult to handle. Break out, they don't dare to kill me. Although Subai felt it was a bit ridiculous, he could only do this for the present. You can help me when the time comes. If I am caught, I will bite you to death. Subai looked at Wu Nehi and said seriously. Wu Nehi took a deep breath and ejected directly to the left from where he was, while Subai ejected to the right. Both of them had strengthened their bodies, and their physical strength was naturally extremely powerful. Therefore, the place where the two of them were originally standing there were actually two reaction force grooves at the location. Catch him and leave the other alone. The prince directly waved his hand and ordered, and at the same time added, don't hurt my royal concubine. In the Ming dynasty, Zhu Dijing was unable to succeed and seize the throne. In fact, Zhu Di's power was very small at the beginning, and he was often defeated by Zhu Yunwen's government troops. However, it was because Zhu Yunwen hypocritically ordered the soldiers not to kill my imperial uncle, which led to Zhu Di freely escaping from the defeated army many times and finally being able to make a comeback and seize the city of Nanjing to usurp the throne successfully. And Subai is now taking advantage of this. Okay. Aren't you, the prince, unwilling to kill me, and want to keep me in captivity as delicious as a breeding pig? Subai went on a rampage deliberately. If anyone attacked him, Subai would rush over without any hindrance. He was like a sandbag that begged to be beaten and killed, and was given to these vampires to beat and kill. On the contrary, this made these vampires somewhat helpless. One vampire had no choice but to forcibly release the force in his hand, and the force actually came back to him. There was also a powerful vampire who saw Subai rushing over and had to take off his offensive. However, Subai counterattacked unceremoniously and punched his head off. In this level of fighting, if you dare to hold back, if you dare to hold back, if you dare to throw a rat weapon, then you shall die. Especially since Subai is a vampire himself, he certainly knows better where the vampire's weaknesses are and how to kill a vampire in the simplest and fastest way. In a short period of time, Subai killed a strong vampire in this rogue way and seriously injured 3 of them. These are all things that happened in a short period of time. The prince standing on the tree reached out and pinched off one side of the trunk, and roared. My dear concubine, you are shameless when your highness gives you face. Don't hold back, kill him for me and leave the body to your highness. The dead and seriously injured vampires were all the prince's trusted subordinates. He was really heartbroken. Of course, he didn't expect that Subai would be so shameless and so ruthless based on his previous orders. Are you going to kill me now when you react? Hee. That's too late. Subai took the initiative to attack another vampire who was not very strong. The vampire was about to let go immediately, but Subai dodged and rushed out in the other direction. The previous beating was combined with the prince's blind orders resulted in the death and injury of less than half of the group, and the encircling formation was already in chaos. Subai's sudden breakthrough unexpectedly caught them off guard. My dear concubine, your highness wants to see if you can escape my grasp. His highness the prince speeded up and turned into a streak of blood and chased Subai. This persistence, this deep affection. There is indeed no one left. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 654. The encirclement that seemed impossible to break through was broken out in this way. Subai didn't feel much fluctuation in his heart, and he didn't feel too lucky. Since the other party was interested in his new blood, then the other party was always interested. From the beginning, it is basically impossible to intercept with the ultimate goal of killing yourself. This also gives you the opportunity and possibility to take advantage of the situation, and it is a great opportunity and possibility. After all, Subai is not a docile little white rabbit. These so-called strong men who grew up in the world of fairy tales seem a little childish and cute in front of the audience, a killing machine. But next time, the other party should be serious about it. After all, in order to break out, he killed and seriously injured their people before. The other party is probably determined to treat him alive or even to see people dead or corpses. The previous behavior and attempt can be said. Never again. As for Wu Neihe, the last time they met in the mountains and forests, the two simply exchanged information. Subai actually hid something from Wu Neihe, which is why Wu Neihe came to help at that time, but this time, Subai really didn't have any hope that Wu Neihe would come back to help him as he said before. If it were Subai himself, Subai felt that he would most likely leave here first, even if the success rate of assassinating the old princess was very low, and even if he finally left the story world empty-handed, he would not bother to continue to put himself in a dangerous spiral. In the nest. In front of him was a waterfall. Subai jumped into the air, turned over and jumped down. He could feel the breath of the prince chasing him behind him. There must be other Blood Clan subordinates behind him, and he must not be entangled. Come on, even if the opponent is relatively naive in terms of combat experience and consciousness, in my opinion, there are too many ants and they can kill an elephant. However, just when Subai jumped off the waterfall, he suddenly felt an explosion behind him, and then a bloody figure appeared in front of him, surpassing him at a speed twice as fast as before. This is a secret technique to speed up? Damn. I don't know any of the vampire's magic or methods. At this time, it was too late for Subai to regret that he had not put any effort into blood magic. He could only wait to leave the story world before studying it. At this moment, Subai did not hesitate at all. The black dragon scales on his right palm were covered, and the fist hit the prince who was blocking him in front of him. My beloved concubine, don't run away. Boom. The prince placed his fists in front of him to block Subai's punch, but the terrifying heat from Subai's fists directly burned his arms. The last time they fought, Subai didn't use all his strength. This gave the prince a wrong understanding, that is, before Subai blew himself up and killed himself together, he could stop Subai calmly, and the rest of his men still behind. When the time comes to surround Subai, if he doesn't make the previous mistakes, he can easily control Subai at will. But when they met again this time, the prince was shocked to find that Subai's aura and fighting mode had a completely different feeling from the last time they fought. This is nonsense. Last time, Subai just wanted to hurt the prince to see if he was a vampire to get some information. Naturally, he would not go all out. Now, what else do you care about? If I don't kill you, will I really be captured and become your princess? The prince let out a low shout. He even smelled the aroma of burning flesh and blood on his arms at this moment, and his body was carried forward by Subai for a distance. But the next moment, the prince's eyes turned red, and a circle of blood-red light enveloped himself and Subai. Suddenly, Subai seemed to have lost all awareness of his body, and his body fell subconsciously. But before falling, Subai grasped the prince's ankle with one hand and pulled it down like an inertia. The prince's whole body was also dragged down. When the prince was dragged down, Subai realized that the vampire magic just now should have created the illusion that he had lost the perception and control of his body. In fact, his strength and body were still under his control. The two of them fell into the deep pool of the waterfall together. If this scene looks from a distance, it looks like two people who died in love jumping off the cliff together to verify their pure and flawless love with the water of the waterfall. Well, they are still two gays. But as soon as the two of them fell into the puddle, explosions began to occur continuously in the deep pool, and the terrible shock caused the water in the waterfall to branch. Roar! Roar! The roars of the two men came, refusing to give in to each other. Immediately, Subai and the prince flew out of the water together. Subai pinched the prince's neck with one hand and pressed the prince to the ground and pushed him forward. The prince's body swept away the mud and rocks on the ground, leaving behind a gully of tens of meters was formed. Immediately afterwards, Subai crushed his left foot to death, exerted force on his waist, and bloodlines rose up ferociously all over his body, slamming the prince directly onto the rock in front of him. Boom! The prince's body exploded instantly and turned into a rain of blood, but the next moment, it condensed again behind Subai. My beloved, you are so violent. Hee, I like it very much. I like it very much. I like to subdue strong men the most. The feeling of having them lie down in front of me and be conquered by me is really intoxicating. Ah! The prince twisted his neck and squatted down slightly. Immediately, identical shadows appeared in front of Subai. There were more than 10 prince figures in total, looking at Subai together. At this moment, Subai couldn't tell which one was true. More than a dozen phantoms spoke together. My dear concubine, you are a vampire, but why do you have such a low understanding of our vampire methods? The vampires are not those despicable things like those living dead humans and barbarians who only use brute force. Today, I will let you, my dear concubine, open your eyes. Your Highness, I will teach you well. As soon as he finished speaking, more than a dozen figures jumped towards Subai. Subai turned his body in a circle and punched out, but it was all fake. Then Subai's back hurt, and a claw actually scratched his back. Subsequently, Subai launched another attack, but it was all in vain, and he was injured continuously. The opponent completely relied on Subai's weakness of only physical attacks to launch a special attack on Subai. You know, knowing only the simplest and barbaric way of fighting is a shame for a noble vampire. My beloved, stay with me. I can give you the most honorable status. It can also give you the blood magic you lack. After all, you have such a high level of blood, wouldn't it be a waste if you don't know blood magic? The prince wanted to train Subai wholeheartedly, and while he was talking, he never stopped attacking Subai. Obviously, after knowing the gap in absolute physical strength between the two sides, the prince decisively chose using this curved approach to attack. He was really no match for Subai in a one-on-one battle with Subai's physical strength. Subai closed his eyes, and injuries kept appearing on his body, but Subai ignored it. The prince was probably afraid of Subai's instant counterattack, so he only attacked briefly every time, which was enough to cause some damage to Subai but also save the life. This is a very safe way to prevent Subai from counterattacking. At this moment, the scene of the place of enlightenment appeared in Subai's mind. There is darkness everywhere. There was darkness all around. Coffin. Sculpture. Altar. River. 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 Amusement machine. I was lying in the river and saw those faceless people holding lamps. The Yellow River, the place of enlightenment, has the world's most terrifying ability to confuse people's hearts. Subai once entered it personally and experienced firsthand how terrifying the temptation, and delusion there are. But, precisely because I have experienced it, so compared to the beginning, everything seems to be childish now. At this time, Subai slowly opened his eyes. He had become a bloody man, with scars all over his body, but his eyes became turbid at this time, as if a yellow river was flowing from it. The stream flows through the pupils. That feeling, that state, that vague sense of loss, Subai found it again. Everything in his sight had a double image, but only the figures of a dozen princes became particularly clear at this time. And there's only one left. The prince appeared in front of Subai again, intending to pierce Subai's neck with his nails, but Subai suddenly made a move and pinched the prince's left arm with great accuracy. The prince trembled. Damn! He must have been lucky enough to meet him. However, before the prince had time to make the next reaction, or even before he could self-destruct his left arm to break free from Subai's control, He saw Subai's right hand suddenly thrust downwards, and a hellfire shotgun instantly appeared in his palm. Muzzle. With lightning speed, he forced himself in directly from the prince's back court. Puff. The prince opened his mouth and let out a scream. I asked you to train me, come on, train me, come on. Come on. Subai let out an angry roar, and was called princess by this abnormal prince. Moreover, the other party did not deliberately deceive the tone. It was obvious that he really had good taste and regarded himself as his forbidden wife. Subai's heart had already been filled with anger. This guy was stalking him like a piece of candy, which made Subai feel extremely angry. This time, this opportunity, this moment, Subai naturally couldn't miss it. Boom. Subai pulled the trigger. Hellfire shotguns were fired in the prince's backyard. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 655. Ah! A tragic scream came from the waterfall, shaking the mountain forest and lasting for a long time. It was like the listener shed tears for the sad listener. At this moment, the prince's eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and even the pores of his body were filled with golden light. He did not expect that Subai could discover his true form in an instant and control himself in advance. Certainly. He never thought that Subai would use such a harsh method to deal with his body. No. It is trampling on one's own soul and orientation. The prince fell to the ground slumped. He was bombarded by the hellfire shotgun at such a negative distance. The damage must not be underestimated. The prince lying on the ground looked like a dead dog at this time, his eyes turned white, and his body it kept twitching, and blood dripped out from time to time. Obviously, it was the demon-breaking effect of the hellfire shotgun that exploded most effectively in the prince's rectum, directly disrupting the balance of vampire energy in the prince's body. You must know that vampire power is also a kind of evil force, and the prince also proficient in magic, and the hellfire shotgun is famous for its magic-breaking effect. This shot directly killed the prince. He could not even control the blood and its most essential power in his body. It was a terrible thing for a vampire to bleed. Subai stepped on the prince's face with one foot and stepped on it a little harder. The prince had not yet regained consciousness, but his vitality was still tenacious. Obviously, the vitality of this high-level vampire was indeed very powerful. He was shot by the hellfire. With a gun at such a negative range, the gunman could not die. The rest of the audience would have died long ago. Bang! 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 Subai shot the prince's hands and feet 3 times in a row, leaving only one of his legs intact. The other arms and the other leg were directly blown off. The prince's eyes became even more dull. He was now like a victim. The girl who was so cruel could only lie there and let the thugs ravage her in vain. Life is like rape. If you can't resist, just roll your eyes and enjoy it. From behind, the tracking aura became clearer, and it was obvious that the prince's men had followed. In this fairy tale world, as long as the indigenous strongmen here are not fighting or using their abilities, the audience has no way to capture their breath to identify their specific identities, but when they use their own power, their breath induction can be used. Subai had no intention of directly sucking the prince into adulthood at this time. Although based on the prince's bloodline level, there was a high probability that sucking him would further improve his own bloodline. However, there was not enough time at first. The pursuers were almost here, and secondly, Subai still wanted to get something from him. Carrying the crippled prince on his shoulders, Subai started running again. A bloody man was carrying a man with severed arms and legs. This scene seemed very inconsistent, but it really happened. In fact, Subai could have used the prince at hand as a hostage to deter the pursuers from taking action, but he still needed to pry out more things from the prince, so he had no time to confront the pursuers. If you are caught up, it is not too late to confront them. In short, the pursuit lasted until late at night, almost for a whole day. Subai completely exhausted his physical strength and kept moving and running, and the pursuers behind him seemed to have realized that something had happened to his prince. It was very likely that it was in Subai's hands, so he gritted his teeth and chased after it. But there is a high probability that the prince only has Subai's blood sample in his hands, and only the prince can locate Subai's location. Therefore, the pursuers are no longer tracking him as quickly and accurately as they did at the beginning. Late at night, Subai was finally convinced that he had finally gotten rid of the pursuers behind him. In front of him was a tribe with herdsmen, cattle, and sheep. Subai did not enter the tribe, but stopped in the reeds beside the river beside the tribe. The reason why I chose to stop by the tribe is very simple. I am a vampire, and this half-dead prince is also a vampire. The best way for vampires to restore their strength and vitality is the fresh blood of living people. However, before that, Subai had to test whether this nomadic tribe was a tribe of ordinary people. It would be ridiculous if they went in to suck blood without saying a word, and all the people were masters. The biggest inconvenience in this story world is here. Normally you can't tell the difference between the strong and ordinary people in this story world. The prince is still unconscious. Without the supply of fresh blood, it is obviously unrealistic for the prince to rely on his own recovery to heal his injuries. Subai is more relieved about this. Therefore, Subai simply sends the prince to the hospital. He was buried directly in the mud in the reeds, leaving only half of his face to breathe. Then, Subai walked out of the reeds, picked up a stone from the river, and threw it directly at an adult man who was walking in the tribe. The stone contained Subai's energy, which was more terrifying than the power of bullets. It hit the man's head directly. The man's head exploded, and then the headless body fell to the ground. The tribe was suddenly alarmed, with screams and shouts. Then Subai hid outside the tribe's fence and calmly observed the situation inside. There were people wearing armor and holding swords who came over to maintain order, and some old men appeared to comfort them. However, after watching for so long, no one jumped out to look for the attackers or flew out to check. This basically confirmed that this tribe was just a tribe of ordinary people. "Sorry, NPCs," Subai whispered. "In the story world, if you kill ordinary people, the radio will not care about you, and there will be no punishment. Therefore, many intensifiers of the evil school often look for opportunities to refine their own evil weapons in the story world. After all, it is not practical in the real world. There are too many constraints. If you are not careful, the broadcaster may issue a realistic mission, and then a stronger audience will immediately come to kill you. And Subai has always treated people in the story world as NPCs. Now, he can only think of it this way. After all, they are innocent, and both Subai and the vampire prince need fresh human blood. So, that's all. In the future, the surviving people of this tribe have been passing down a terrible legend from word to mouth, that is, on a full moon night, a devil came to the tribe, and he brought death and plague, resulting in the population of several people. The tribe of hundreds of people basically disappeared, and some of the surviving people could no longer support a tribe and had to disperse. Gudu, gudu, gudu. The prince only felt the clear sweet spring pouring into his chapped lips. He opened his mouth as much as possible and sucked crazily. He knew what this was. This was what he had been drinking since he was a child. This is human blood. Fresh human blood. However, after drinking for a long time, the prince suddenly discovered that no matter how much he drank, the condition in his body had not improved at all. This was impossible. Even if it was the blood of ordinary people, it would not have any effect. Nothing. The prince struggled to open his eyes. He still felt dizzy and his body was in a mess. After all, Subai's negative range shot really knocked him unconscious. Immediately, a scene that made the prince furious appeared. He saw that someone had forcibly dug a pit on the steps above him, and then there were many corpses piled on the pit. The blood of these corpses dripped down and flowed along the groove to his own mouth, and there is another person on his body, piercing his fangs into his body and sucking his blood. He is using himself as a blood converter. After all, how could the blood of ordinary people be as valuable as the blood of a prince like him? Subai raised his head and let out a long sigh of satisfaction. The injuries on his body were basically recovered. The prince's blood was really precious and the effect was very good. Subai's previous injuries had been completely recovered and his condition was very good. Full. At this time, he saw the prince staring at him fiercely. Subai smiled, reached out and patted the prince on the chest. "Drink quickly, don't waste it. The weather is quite hot now, and these corpses and blood will stink in a while." Subai reminded kindly. The prince could only open his mouth and continue to drink blood. He knew that he had to drink. If he wanted to survive, he had to drink. If he wanted to break free from this man's kidnapping, he had to drink. Subai did not continue to suck the prince's blood this time, but in his heart, the prince's condition and blood replenishment amount were already counted, and he would not allow the prince to recover to the point where he could no longer control it. "You are my hostage now," Subai said calmly. "What do you want?" the prince asked while drinking blood. "Blood magic, you know, I don't know blood magic, so I'm eager to learn blood magic." After saying that, Subai waved his hand and blocked the groove to prevent the prince from drinking blood. "Is there any vampire magic that is easier to learn and more practical? Teach me one. Otherwise, you can just die." "Haha, you want me to teach you blood magic?" The prince looked at Subai and sneered. "If you really want to learn blood magic, my highness has told you before. Do you want to be my concubine? My highness can teach you anything you want to learn, but why are you so ignorant?" Subai reached out and patted his forehead, and said helplessly, "Sorry, I'm not very interested in you. What I really care about is your mother." When the prince heard this, he looked at Subai with shock and disbelief. He already felt that his taste was unique and heretical enough. He didn't expect that Subai's taste was even more exaggerated than his own. This guy. Are you actually interested in your own mother? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 656. Hey, beloved concubine, you can't treat me like this, you absolutely can't treat me like this. Where is the love you promised, where is the love you promised? The prince roared, roaring, with a kind of hysteria. Even though he was talking about love and a lot of sweetness, his face was extremely ferocious. It was obvious that his hatred for Subai could not be described in words. "Damn it, you didn't abide by the agreement. I gave you blood essence with memories, but you didn't abide by the agreement. Damn it, why? I just promised not to kill you, I didn't say I would let you go." Subai looked at the prince who was fixed to the rock wall with the iron chain from the tribe. He was very calm. In Subai's palm, he was holding a drop of blood essence. Immediately, Subai put the blood essence into his mouth. For a moment, the information contained in the blood essence began to be decomposed and absorbed by Subai. Only the vampires can condense this kind of blood essence, and only the vampires can absorb it. This drop of blood is imprinted with a vampire magic called Blood Shadow Clone, which is the same skill that the prince used on Subai before. This skill is very effective. If Subai hadn't recalled the perspective and feeling in the Yellow River before, no matter how strong Subai was physically, he would have been tortured to death by the prince using this method. However, Subai was not sure whether he could succeed in practicing this kind of vampire magic for the first time or whether he could master it in a short time. The handprints began to be pinched out according to the memories that appeared in the mind. The blood in the body was starting to circulate according to a specific pattern. According to the information, this vampire magic should be a two-way pattern formed by the handprints and the blood flow in the body. and effect, because Subai didn't understand formations and had never practiced magic, so he could only sense according to his own ambiguous understanding. When the entire process was completed, Subai found that his vision began to blur, and a kind of visual superposition appeared. Looking from the side, another Subai appeared next to Subai, but this Subai seemed to have insufficient paint, and the color was obviously much lighter. It was not real at first glance. Subai took a deep breath, and the ink-deficient version of himself beside him disappeared. Shook his head. Is this considered a failure? Subai was a little unmotivated. Damn it, it was so far away from the feeling of directly exchanging skills in the Wadian. The skills and bloodline abilities redeemed in the Wadian could be used directly anyway, so it was not like he needed to slow down now. Slowly explore and understand, wasting so much time in vain. However, when Subai turned around, he saw the prince who was tied to the rock wall with iron chains looking at Subai as if he had seen a ghost. Subai frowned slightly, pointed at himself, and asked, "What's your expression? Have you really never been exposed to vampire magic before?" the prince said in disbelief. "Heh, you mean I'm so talented that I'm pretty awesome at being able to condense a shadow for the first time?" The prince shook his head. "No, I think that with your bloodline level and my inheritance, you can at least condense 3 or more identical clones for the first time, but you can't even create one clone the condensation is successful, and that one is fake at first glance. Your Highness really feels that your bloodline level is really in vain." Subai took a deep breath. "Hey, you're itchy again, right? What my Highness said is true. You really don't have the talent to practice blood magic. In my opinion, it would be best for you to simply use the simplest and most brutal fighting method." Subai pursed his lips. He didn't know whether what the prince said was true or false, because Subai was really not sure whether he had any talent for blood magic. After all, he was different from the Korean and Japanese listeners. "I treat my own strengthening as a kind of culture and inheritance, and I am very utilitarian. No matter how talented I am, or whether I'm not interested in this blood magic, you can give me a few dozen drops of blood and give me all the blood magic you know." His Royal Highness immediately cried with sadness and said angrily, "My beloved, do you think this is cabbage on the street? Do you think you can dig it out by the dozen? This kind of magic inheritance essence and blood directly harms me. The foundation of my soul, it takes at least 1 year of cultivation to condense the second drop, otherwise my soul will collapse because of this. If you really want His Highness to continue giving it to you, you might as well kill His Highness now." "You know what?" Subai looked at His Highness the Prince and said helplessly, "I thought you were quite two at first. I'm sorry, you may not know what two means, but now I suddenly feel like I can't figure you out. Especially the 2 questions I just asked you. Why do I have a hunch that you didn't tell me the truth? The first question is that you don't believe in His Highness because you are a narcissistic person. The second question is that you don't believe in His Highness because you are not an orthodox vampire. The reason is very simple." "Okay, the reason is very simple." Subai nodded, stretched out his hand to pull out the iron chain from the rock wall, and then put the prince on his shoulders with the iron chain. "We have to change positions. Be good, don't make trouble, I'll walk you home." "Are you really that good? Didn't I tell you the truth? I don't want to mess with you. What I want to mess with is your mother." "Prince." Subai suddenly found that the tracking of him seemed to have suddenly disappeared. Even if he stayed in one place for a little longer with the prince as a hostage, there was no vampire following him again. This is inappropriate. The reason is that the prince has his own blood sample on hand, so he can quickly determine his location and track it. However, Subai does not believe that those vampires do not even have the ability to locate their own prince. This is simply impossible. It happened to be noon at this time, and the city would appear in front of him again after climbing over the hilltop in front. Subai placed the prince by the stream, and stood by the stream to wash his face. What's going on, Your Highness? It seems like the people in your clan have given up on you. Something must have happened in the clan. The prince also noticed something was wrong in the past 2 days, there must be something serious. Subai didn't speak, because Subai was thinking that it was possible that the rest of the audience who stayed in the city had assassinated the princess, causing the vampires to withdraw all their power here to protect the old princess, while temporarily neglecting to rescue the prince. But that doesn't make sense. Which one is more important, the prince or the old princess? According to Subai's logic, it seems that the prince is more important. After all, he is the heir of the clan. So, if something goes wrong, what will happen? Let's keep walking. No matter what, I have to ask your mother to come out and negotiate terms with me. This is Subai's current plan. With the prince as a hostage on hand, he will find a way to attract the princess to come out and negotiate terms with him. I will kill the princess directly when the time comes, then this story world will be over, and I can return to the real world. However, when Subai just climbed over the hill, he suddenly saw 2 corpses hanging on the city gate. These 4 corpses were hung there like a demonstration. It seemed that they had been hanging there for more than a day. That is to say, they were probably killed when they were playing hide and seek with the prince. To be on the safe side, Subai had no choice but to go back again, find a relatively secluded place, tie the prince's hands and feet again, and then gag his mouth. Then, still uneasy, he sucked a lot of the prince's blood, and let the prince directly after falling into a coma. Subai tidied up his clothes again and walked towards the city gate pretending to be an ordinary person. There were many people going in and out of the city gate. It seemed that the atmosphere in the city was not tense. Both the people and the merchants were talking and laughing. They were not frightened at all by the 2 corpses on the city wall. When they got closer, Subai looked up and felt a tingling feeling in his scalp. Subai knew the people hanging on the wall, but they were the 2 Western audiences who had brought their own Cinderellas into the banquet. Hanging on the city wall are clearly 2 listeners. After all, they were all audience members. Subai instinctively sensed a sense of crisis coming. This is not scientific. Could it be that these 2 people joined forces to assassinate the princess and failed, but were killed instead, and then the princess ordered the bodies of these 2 people to be hung at the entrance of the city wall to warn the other assassins? Just when Subai was stunned, Subai saw a group of cavalry coming out of the city. The armors of this group of cavalry were all covered with secret patterns. When they galloped up on their horses, their aura and the aura of the horses were at the same level. In a kind of dynamic balance, at the same time, Subai also had a shocking energy fluctuation flowing on their swords. This team of cavalry is definitely not ordinary people. Subai walked into the city gate, and was shocked to find that there were wooden stakes erected in the aisle at the entrance of the city gate. Each wooden stake was covered with a skull, and they were very fresh. The skulls were obviously dead not long ago, and there was a cross placed under each skull, which looked more like a mockery than a prayer. Subai could feel a sense of resonance with these skulls. These dead. Are they all vampires? At this time, Subai heard the voices of 2 salesmen next to him. One of them was showing off what he knew to another person who had just entered the city today. The knights and priests of the Holy See suddenly appeared in the city yesterday and strangled the city lord who had become the first supporter of the vampire clan. They also killed a large number of vampires hiding here and captured some nobles among the vampires alive. What was hanging on the road inside the city gate were the skulls of those vampires, and the 2 corpses hanging outside the city gate were assassins who planned to rob the prison to save the vampire nobles at night. They were killed on the spot after being discovered and then hung there. Hey, don't you think it's strange? I heard someone say that the 2 people hanging outside the city gate are not vampires. They are actually going to save the captured vampire nobles. That's because they were bribed by vampires. You know, some humans are just dirty and despicable and want to join in with these dark creatures. After hearing these words, Subai subconsciously rubbed his chin beside him. Those two Westerners didn't go to save people, they wanted to kill the old princess. As a result, they misjudged the defensive strength of the Holy See and it was a tragedy. This time, things are in trouble. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 657. The Holy See, this organization, Subai had never thought that he would encounter before. He thought that main mission 123 could end smoothly. He had already completed main mission 2 due to some ridiculous coincidence. In fact, Subai was already somewhat satisfied. Regarding the main mission 3, who can successfully assassinate the old princess still has to rely on luck and courage. Subai did not have high expectations. Even though the vampire prince is now in his hands, Subai still does not have much certainty. What if? It is highly possible that any of the other listeners actually succeeded in assassinating the old princess. But now, the strong intervention of the Holy See has suddenly made this originally simple plot extremely complicated. The two corpses of the audience hanging on the city gate tower are the best proof. The power of the Holy See suddenly intervened, forcefully cleaning up the corrupt and depraved city lords' forces, and almost uprooting the vampires hidden in the city. Even the old princess was captured by them. According to the Holy See's stupid logic, it can be generally concluded that the old princess and other nobles should be sent to the Vatican for trial. In short, there are a lot of procedures to go through, and the death penalty will definitely be executed or even permanently detained after 30 days. As exhibits, after all, whether it is religion or the government, especially those who claim to be upright, what they like most is formalism, that is, showing off, and they are still happy with it. In other words, if the audience now wants to kill the old princess to complete the task, they must first break through the Holy See forces escorted along the way. The difficulty of the task has obviously increased by several orders of magnitude. This comparison is also very simple and clear. That is, the old princess was originally protected by the strong vampires, but now she is protected by the power of the Holy See that has swept away the vampires. It is obvious that the latter is more powerful than the former. One thing. Subai wandered around the city for a while and found a lot of clergy wearing Holy See clothes walking around here, probably preparing to establish a new urban order. He also saw two other groups of knights riding horses passing by on the street. He did not dare to stay in the city for too long, so he bought some food and drink supplies, carried them on his back, and left the city. When leaving the city, I looked back at the two listeners hanging on the wall. Well, they are also senior people. Subai thought to himself that if he had been in the city at that time, he would have thought like them, taking advantage of the fact that the Holy See had just strangled the vampires here and the vampires here were not yet stable, and wanted to assassinate the old princess. After all, the purpose was not to save her but to kill her. The difficulty of killing her has undoubtedly been reduced a lot as long as he infiltrates in front of the old princess and kills her, there is no need to worry about anything else. It can only be said that these two people were lucky and made the wrong bet. For listeners, a wrong bet may lead to eternal disaster. Even though this is a fairy tale world, the radio's attitude towards listeners and the aesthetics of radio have not changed much. Besides, in this fairy tale world, where is the difference? Beautiful. Subai left the city, took a detour, and then found the place where he hid the prince after making sure that no one was following him. The prince was still awake at the moment, so Subai came over and kicked him. He slowly opened his eyes with a pale face. Before leaving, Subai sucked another wave of blood. The prince was really frighteningly weak now. What happened? The prince asked. Obviously, from the fact that people from his family did not send people to look for him, He actually already knew what must have happened in the city. He knew very well what he had to do about it. The importance of ethnicity. The power of the Holy See appeared, and then on behalf of the moon, it destroyed you. Your mother and a bunch of your blood nobles were captured alive, and your people's heads were made into decorations and hung on wooden piles for people to browse. Subai was very calm. He said quietly, as if he was saying that Mr. Wang next door went out to play cards again today and lost money and went home to beat his wife. There was a ferocious look on the prince's face, and his body struggled for a while, but it showed a sense of being strong on the outside but strong on the inside. He was indeed strong on the outside but strong on the inside. I want revenge. The prince pursed his chapped lips, looked at Subai and said seriously, I want revenge. This sounds like a primary school student writing an essay saying that he wants to be a scientist when he grows up. Oh, I'm sorry, I said something you don't understand again. Subai was hesitating at this time. In fact, he could get rid of the prince first, and then go to the rest of the audience to work together to find a way to break through the Holy See's defense line and kill the princess within the mission period. Of course, there is another way, and that is to cooperate with the prince. No matter how seriously injured the prince is, the worst he can do is take him to suck a wave of blood and he will be able to recover. This is the advantage of the vampire clan, and then help. He went to split the mountain to save his mother together, playing the role of Agar Wood, but the final outcome must be that the two finally rescued the old princess. When the mother and son were reunited, Subai stood behind him and shot the old princess's head. The prince, who looked confused, was left behind, and he left the story world and disappeared. In fact, these two choices are not very good for Subai. First of all, if nothing unexpected happens, there should be 4 Westerners left. Cooperating with Westerners is not due to racial prejudice, but the two parties are not from the same people. Not to mention that there are 3 Westerners whose Cinderella was killed by themselves, which basically eliminates the possibility of cooperation. Cooperate with Easterners. Guya Zhang and Lancer were detained by the old princess on the spot because of the red glass slippers. They didn't know whether they were alive or dead, but they were probably dead, so only Anil, Nova, and Wu Nehi were left. In Subai's opinion, Anil only seemed to be a very smart person, but he was far worse than Fatty Monk and the others, because Anil was too self-righteous and too sharp, and he regarded his habit of cheating others as a sign of his excellence. When you cooperate with such a person, he may suddenly stab you in the back when he is not very smart. When you cooperate with Fat Monk and the others, at least when you have common interests, you don't need to worry about stabbing you in the back. Children's sense of security. Wu Nehi is a guy with a bad brain who can adapt to the situation. He can be tricked into becoming his helper. But if it is just Wu Nehi and himself, the 2 corpses of Western listeners hanging on the city wall will be the best end. The power is still not enough. After such an analysis, it seems that cooperation with this prince baby has become a more feasible way. By the way, where is your father? Subai asked. This guy is a prince, so he obviously has a king. My father has disappeared a long time ago. I have not reached the age of coming of age ceremony for the blood clan, so I have always been a prince, and the affairs of the clan are basically decided by my mother. Oh, it means that your tribe, or kingdom, is just a vampire here, not all vampires in the world. There are actually many vampire kingdoms. The prince implicitly agreed to this statement. This means that he is most likely to be a loner now. If he wants to regrow the tribe in the future, he must either rescue the captured tribesmen, or he can reopen his branches and slowly gather the rest of the vampires, or he can find the qualifications himself. The beginning of human development. Aren't you interested in my mother? The prince suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Subai and said hastily, as long as you can help His Highness rescue my mother and other tribesmen, His Highness believes that the Queen will remember you for saving her life. I am with you out of kindness. Subai. After a long silence, Subai suddenly felt a bit of toothache, but he still nodded and said, "Okay, for love." Carrying the prince on his shoulders, Subai suddenly felt a little inconsistent, not because the prince was gay, but because according to the idea mentioned by the prince he was carrying now was his own son. The little guy Suyukshuan actually has an extra brother, a prince. As soon as he thought of this, a smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. Subai was such a person. Even when faced with the truth about his life experience, he could quickly calm down. He was able to endure it. All of this actually shows that Subai has a big heart. Well, maybe this is the only benefit that a mentally ill person can find. Things and situations that are difficult for normal people to accept Subai instead, you can face it calmly. Why are you laughing? My mother hasn't been rescued yet. The prince's face was very close to Subai's. Naturally, he could clearly see the changes in Subai's expression. Tell me, should I thank you? If instead of chasing you out and leaving the city, His Highness might have become a prisoner of the Holy See gang now, or simply died in the battle with the Holy See. It is only natural for a father to save his son. Subai suddenly asked curiously, why do you seem to have no objection to your mother being with me? No matter how open the Western cultural circle is, it is not open to this extent, right? The prince looked at Subai as a matter of course. Do you know why our tribe can continue to keep those elders loyal during the 100 years since my father has been missing? After hearing this, Subai suddenly thought of a possibility and said, don't tell me that those elders are all under your mother's skirt. What does the pomegranate skirt mean? But it's almost the same. The Queen Mother has indeed aged a bit in the past few years. In the past, she relied on her own wrists and her body to tightly connect the elders to the ethnic group and ensure that the ethnic group was here. Survive and thrive. You are a vampire and you are still so young, so I don't mind a change of taste. Subai took a deep breath and looked at the prince, suddenly feeling a little pitiful for him. No wonder you like men, it's so hard on you. No, 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 it's you who suffer. The two men comforted each other at this time. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 658. The original City Lord enjoyed the treatment of divine sanction, and his skin was peeled off and put on a chair in the hall of the City Lord's mansion. This was used to warn the future City Lord who took over. Although the Holy See prides itself on being a glorious and upright existence and calls itself the spokesperson of God in the world, it wants to gain a foothold in this world and at least openly dominate the righteous side of this world. It is also essential. In fact, in this world, dark creatures can still only live in the darkness, and the mainstream of the world is still dominated by the human power represented by the Holy See. Otherwise, there would be no need for the vampires here to hide themselves so carefully. There are many rooms in the City Lord's mansion. The old City Lord has been sentenced, and most of the old forces in the City Lord's mansion have been executed. The Holy See is very cruel to dark creatures, and it will never be polite to corrupt and fallen humans. Therefore, most of the rooms in the City Lord's mansion are now temporarily occupied by clergy who come over randomly. The new City Lord has received an order from the Vatican, but he needs to go to the capital of this country to meet His Majesty the King before he can arrive. Come here for appointment. This is actually a process. The royal families of many human countries must obtain the approval of the Vatican every time a new king ascends the throne or a prince is canonized. When the new king ascends the throne, if he does not invite a Vatican bishop or priest to preside over it, it will be unfair. Shun. This situation is a bit like the Middle Ages in Western Europe. The Church controls the power of the divine way and also controls the absolute secular power. At least, in this world, there has not yet been a Napoleon who took the crown from the Pope and put it on his head. Squeak. The door was pushed open, and a woman dressed as a maid came in with food. When she was walking in the City Lord's palace with food, she seemed very respectful and cautious, but after entering the door, she relaxed and put the food on the table. After getting there, he sat down and started eating. After a while, a man wearing a robe came out of the back room. The man's face was stern, with a touch of arrogance, but he was not at all angry at his maid for eating the master's food without waiting for him to come over. He also sat down and ate with him. After the two of them finished eating, the maid did not collect the dishes. Instead, she walked to the bed in the back room and took out a wand and held it in her hand. "Can you, an elf, rely on this staff to release magic?" the man in the magic robe asked. "Elven blood comes with the ability to perceive the surrounding natural elements. Now that I have this wand in my hand, it can only allow me to perform the magic I exchanged from the WeChat store more quickly and accurately. Of course, I cannot release it. Forbidden spell, after all, I actually use the elf-enhanced mode of physical attack." This man and woman are obviously Anil and Nova. However, at this time, Anil turned into a low-level priest in the Holy See. This was really unbelievable, and his appearance was completely different from before. Anil reached out and lifted up his robe, revealing an extremely delicate belt with many gems inlaid on it. These two items are the natal magic weapons of the two dead Western listeners. Actually, I still think the safest thing to do now is for us to kill the old princess. Anyway, you are also one of the priests responsible for looking after the blood nobles, so you can do this easily, Nova said with some worry. Look at Anil. Anil smiled, with a kind of disdain in his eyes. This kind of disdain was the attitude of a master leading a novice, and Nova did not feel disgusted by it. On the one hand, it was because she was used to it, and on the other hand, since she followed Anil, indeed, everything went smoothly in many places. This time, I was also assigned this magic wand. This is the natal magical weapon of a Western veteran. Its value is immeasurable and cannot be judged solely based on the exchange price in the WeChat store, because the natal magic weapon will advance as the veteran progresses, and other special changes will occur. Its value cannot be measured by story points. How did you get the staff in your hand? Anil poured himself a glass of wine and took a sip. Don't worry, it's still early. There are about 6 listeners outside. They will look for opportunities to attack the old princess. We just need to wait and wait, use the power of the Holy See to kill them, and then get good things from them. This is a hugely profitable business. Anyway, the old princess is being held there, and we can kill her at any time. Nova knew that she had no decision-making power at all, so she stopped talking. Please pack up the things here first. It is very likely that the Templar Knights of the Holy See will escort the old princess and the others back to the Vatican tonight. I estimate that the rest of the audience will most likely carry out assassinations on the way. I have already applied to accompany the team. As my maid, you can also accompany me in the team, even the low-level priests have this privilege. Anil reminded Nova, then rearranged her disguise in the mirror, then opened the door and walked out. While the rest of the audience were training their Cinderella, Anil had already figured out the power of the Holy See in the city, and successfully captured a priest alive. After using his spiritual power to read his memory, he even disguised himself as him. Therefore, when the vampire's banquet began, Anil actually had another one at that time. Identity. The sudden appearance of the power of the Holy See caught him off guard. As a low-level priest, he was not qualified to know about this. But fortunately, after the power of the Holy See intervened here, it also needed the support of the local church branches. Anil was naturally recruited and arranged when it came to the job of guarding the old princess and her gang. It could be said that she was extremely lucky. In fact, the 2 Western listeners almost succeeded in assassinating the old princess last night, because the people from the Holy See had just strangled the city lord and the Blood Clan forces during the day. They were also very tired and relaxed, and they did not expect that someone would come to rob the prison that night. If Anil had taken action at the last moment and forcibly held back the 2 assassinating Western listeners, causing the Templars and bishops of the Holy See to arrive, the world of this story might have ended long ago. Nova gently rubbed her fingers on the wand. She knew that Onel's behavior was risky, but the harvest is indeed very rich. For a moment, Nova, who had always been cautious in character, began to wonder if she was being too petty. Goody-goodoo, goody-goodoo. After a long drink, what was left on the spot were the corpses of dozens of caravans. They were lying in a mess on the roadside, all turned into mummies. At this time, His Highness the Prince, who drank heavily and was no longer sucked by Subai, finally regained a slight rossiness in his face, and recovered about 60 to 70% of his injuries. Although he could not return to his peak condition instantly, but it was much better than when Subai was carried on his shoulders like a dead dog. Subai rummaged through the caravan's goods and actually found tobacco leaves and some paper. While the prince was busy sucking human blood to recover, Subai was leisurely making cigarettes beside him. After rolling them, he lit them. Took a sip. Subai frowned slightly, threw the Dabai brand cigarette directly on the ground and stomped on it. The smell was really hard to smoke. The prince wiped the blood stains on his face and walked towards Subai with a smile. After sucking the blood, he had recovered so much from his injuries. The prince was obviously in a particularly good mood. Subai stood there and looked at him calmly. This feeling. The prince stretched and walked over. Then. Boom. The prince exerted his strength on the spot, and ejected into the air. He grabbed Subai's neck with one hand and pushed Subai forward dozens of meters at an extremely fast speed to the river, pressing Subai down. Beneath him, half of Subai's body was already soaked in the water. Don't you think it's a risky thing to let me regain my strength? The prince looked at Subai with a sneer. Moreover, you actually want to be interested in my mother. Do you think? Who are you? You, a bastard in the vampire clan, a bastard with no inheritance, actually dare to take a look at the noble princess of the vampire clan, and dare to tarnish the glory of the royal family. The prince looked a little hysterical. He pressed Subai with his hands and roared. Subai still looked very calm. Are you really not afraid that I will kill you? The prince looked very uncomfortable when he saw that Subai was still so calm. First, fight one-on-one. We tried it twice. The first time I saved my strength and it was a draw. The second time I didn't save my strength. I blasted you through the back door and I carried you like a dead dog. For 2 days. Not to mention that your strength has not yet returned to its peak state. Even if you have returned to your peak state, you are still no match for me. The prince's chest rose and fell. Obviously, he knew that what Subai said was right. Even when he was at his peak, he didn't have much chance of winning against Subai. What's more, his injuries were definitely not affected by how much alcohol he had consumed. The blood of 10 ordinary people can be completely restored immediately. My Highness loves and hates you. If you had agreed to be my princess early, you might not have so many things to worry about. Haha, then our heads will be hung together on the roadside inside the city wall for exhibition. The prince let go of his hand with a hum, and Subai fell into the river. Immediately, the prince also sat down in the river. His eyes were a little hollow, looking ahead, but he was definitely not looking at the dozens of people in front of him. There were corpses. In his eyes, those corpses were just leftovers after enjoying the meal. Subai also sat up, his body was completely soaked. 2 men, both wet, sat by the river. The breeze blows. A little cold. I know I can't trust you, because you must have other intentions, but I don't know what else I can do now except trust you. I have no other choice. The prince said feebly. Then, he turned his head helplessly and rested his head on Subai's shoulder. Please tell me, what should I do? I'm really confused. Snapped. Subai slapped the prince directly on the back of the head with one hand, forcing the prince's entire face into the mud at the bottom of the river. Friction, friction. tin on and off. Can you speak normally? Subai asked while continuing to press the prince's head into the mud.